All right, lesson 95, graphs of nonlinear functions. Recognizing shapes of various nonlinear functions. Okay, this is going to just be matching. It's going to be very basic for you. It will get harder through Algebra 2 and Algebra 3, but really today we're just going to be like, can you recognize a quadratic, a parabola? Can you recognize an x cubed graph? Can you recognize a square root graph? And can you recognize an absolute value graph? Okay, so first of all of these functions, don't write this down, okay? Every single one of those function makes what kind of graph? Every single one, yep. This is really y equals mx plus b. This is the line that cuts through the x-axis. You could solve for y and get y equals mx plus b. This is really y equals mx. Okay, all of these are what we call linear, all right? And they all would just graph a line. Okay, so we know linear functions pretty well. All right, I would write this down. These are quadratic functions, okay? Quadratic functions. I would not write this or this down. I want to talk about it. I would write down this, what we call the parent graph. Okay, so I want to talk about this equation here, but don't write it down. You don't need to write this down, okay? F of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. You guys see these all the time, like 3x squared plus 4x minus 1, right? We do like factoring all the time with these. Remember when we plugged these into our calculator and we found where they cross the x-axis, okay? So a cannot be 0. A cannot be 0 because it would get rid of x squared. And if you got rid of x squared, you now have a linear function and not a quadratic. Okay? So you have to have x squared, and x squared is the highest exponent. If x squared is your highest exponent, it is a quadratic function, meaning it will graph a parabola. We have what are called parent functions. Isn't that nice? Parent graphs. All right. So they this is the one you want to picture the most. All right. So this is just y equals x squared. F of x means y. And so if you made yourself a lovely table and just plugged in like a couple of points, okay, we could graph a parabola real quick. Okay. I'm going to plug in -2 for x. What is -2 squared? +4. And I could put a little point here. I could then plug in -1. What's -1 squared when you put in parentheses? Yeah, -1 squared is 1. I could plug in 0 and you would get 0. And then I could plug in 1. What's 1 squared? What's 2 squared? So I could plot these points. All right. Do you need to plot these exact points? No. What you need to be able to do is be like, yeah, I know that's a parabola. Looks like that. Looks like that. Okay. I have to visualize a parabola. And all I have to know is that if x squared is in there, it's a parabola. If it's the highest, okay? If it's the highest exponent. So there you go. That's the parent graph. All right. So more quadratic graphs. Don't write this down. Just watch, okay? So this, guys, is a quadratic. You could factor that or FOIL it all out, and you'd get x squared minus 6x plus 9. This whole thing shifts right 3. It's the exact same graph, just shifted right 3. And I could put all those little points, but I shifted them all right 3. And it is a parabola, okay? And then this one right here shifts down 3 because it's outside the parentheses. So it's the same graph, just shifted down 3 instead of at 0, 0. So I'm just moving that vertex right 3, down 3, all parabolas, okay? Yay for us. What does the negative do? You guys might have noticed when you're graphing on your calculator. There you go. This is the same graph, but it reflects it going down, okay? Makes a downward parabola, okay. All right, now let's do the this guy. Don't write this down. It's just a lot to write down. Write this down. I will talk about what I just crossed off. All right, but write down f of x equals x cubed. And also write down the words cubic functions. We have linear functions, we have quadratic functions, and now we're going to throw in cubic functions. A lot to learn, all right? Cubic goes with x cubed. All right, so you could have a whole bunch of numbers in here. So your equation could look like y equals 3x cubed minus 4x squared plus x minus 5, right? That is a cubic function. How do I know it's cubic? Because the x cubed is the highest exponent. So it will look similar to all the cube graphs. They're all going to look similar, just like all the parabolas look similar. They're up or down, right? They're shifted, okay? And a cannot be 0, because if a is 0, this now becomes a quadratic, okay? So it can't have that. So I would draw this graph. This is the parent graph. I would definitely put this in my notes. Hopefully you drew a parabola under your x squared. Some of you did not make a parabola. Just do a little sketcheroo of a parabola for the x squared one, okay? So for x cubed, same z's, let's plug in the same things that I just plugged in for the other one. Okay, -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. If I plug in -2, what is -2 cubed? It is -8, because it's -2 times -2 times -2. All right, -8. If I plug in -1, what is -1 cubed? It is -1, because it's negative times negative times negative. What about 0? What's 0 cubed? Great. What about +1? What's 1 cubed? And I don't know why I put a -2 there. That should be a +2. Okay. What's 2 cubed? +8. So let's see what this graph is going to look like. Now, you won't have to make a table every time. You're just going to have to recognize the graph. But this is where it comes from, right? Okay. So I've got -2, -8, and I put a little point right here. Then I have -2, -1. Then I have 0, 0. And then I have 1, 1. And then I have 2, 8. Okay. So what you need to know is it curvy curves up and goes forever up, and it curvy curves down to the left. Okay. If you just see a graph that looks like this, you're going to be like, that's a cubic function. That's all you really need to know from this lesson, right? Is just matching the graph with the x cubed. Okay. All right. So quickly, let me show you some cool stuff. Don't write this down, okay? This guy is going to shift right 2. So it's my same graph shifted right 2. This one is going to shift, anybody remember? Down 2. Same cubic graph, but I put that center point down 2. All right? This is the 0, 0 point. And then I have the -1. This one's a little weird, okay? What ends up happening with this one, if you were to plug it in, is it now goes the other way, okay? Because it had the negative, so it flipped the points. So if this could be on there, and you would have a graph that looked like that. Again, it's just matching. It's not going to give you anything challenging. You won't even have to know which is which usually. You're just going to have to be like, that's what cubes look like. I'll show you in the end what you'll see. All right, write this one down. Square roots, and write down f of x equals the square root of x. We actually did graph a couple of square root graphs. Go ahead and write this down, Bishu. We did graph a couple of these the other day when we did domain and range. So some of you may be able to visualize these. All right, so we've got x and y, and we would plug some stuff in. Now, I actually want to plug nice things in. Okay, what cannot go under a square root? Negatives, okay? 0 you can, but no negatives. So like we need nice numbers. 0 does work. What is the square root of 0? Okay, what's another nice number to plug in? 4, I'll do that one in a minute. 1 works. What's the square root of 1? And then yes, 4. What's the square root of 4? And what's the next nice perfect square? 9, and the square root of 9 is 3. Okay, you cannot plug negatives in, right? You can't have the square root of a negative, so we just don't plug any in. Again, you're not going to have to remember this. You are going to have to know what this graph looks like. So I'm going to plot the points 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, 9, 3. Okay, again, mainly, you got to know it looks like that. Square root graph is like a sideways half a parabola. Okay? Okay, did everyone draw that? Great. Okay, so real quick, this one, anybody have a guess as to which way it would go? Or shift? What would be the shift? 2 to the left. It's always opposite underneath. And then there's your square root graph. Anyone have a guess as to what this would do? It's positive 2. It's not under the square root, and so it's actually up 2. And I would draw my little curve thing. Anyone has a guess as to what the negative would look like? It will reflect below. Okay, so you still plug in like the +4, but you'll get a -2 this time. Yeah. No, the square root graph only goes top or bottom if it's negative. Don't draw them together. All right, absolute value. This is the last one. Okay, so there are 5 of them. Okay, this one is called absolute value because we are doing f of x equals the absolute value of x. So we have linear, quadratic, cubic, square root, absolute value. All right, so some points to plug in. We can do kind of the same ones. We're all good. We can plug in -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. You're allowed to plug in negatives, right? We're all good with negatives. So if I plug in -2, what's the absolute value of -2? If I plug in -1, what's the absolute value of -1? If I plug in 0, if I plug in 1, if I plug in 2. Okay, so when we graph it, we get -2, 2, -1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2. And this would go forever, all right? It makes a V. This could keep going. I know I only plugged in a few points, but this goes forever. Okay, again, do I need to plug these points in the future? No, I just need to know the absolute value graph looks like a what? That's it. Okay, it's V. It's V. Yes? So, yeah, but quadratics curve. Yeah, and these don't curve at all. They are just straight lines, but look like a V. So let's see what happens when we shift it. Okay, x minus 2 inside the function is opposite the -2, and it's right or left. So this one would go right 2. Again, you don't need to remember this, just a general what this would look like, okay? +2 outside would be up 2. Draw myself a V, okay? What is this one going to look like? Yeah, this one's a V going downwards. Okay, that's it. Given are the equations. Here's what you'll actually do on your homework now that I went to all that extreme, okay, to explain that to you. We're just going to do a little matcheroo. So the function, you don't fully have to understand all the shifts, right? I don't really care that there's a +2. All we need to know is that has what in it? X squared, which means what kind of graph? So which one is it? 4. So this is the f of x function because they labeled it f of x, okay? Oh, I guess they're all, I don't know. It's the f of x equals x squared plus 2 since there's another one. All right, and then we've got this cubic one, all right? X cubed. Which graph is this one? Yeah, it's number 2. We'll put the little number 2 up here. All right, this one right here, what kind of graph? Absolute value, and it is negative, so it's going down. Okay, so it is 3. And which one is this? Square root graph, which looks like that. So you're just gonna like do a little match. That's it, all right? Memorize the shapes. Let's try some whiteboards.